I'd like to give the floor to the next speaker. Guntis Vāveris is one of those courageous people we discovered and approached and asked to present today. He will talk about the era which the residents of Riga know very little about. We're curious to find out what happened to the city and the port in the Soviet times. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I was invited to present at this conference, and I'm genuinely grateful to present this topic to you today. The title may seem complex, but also intriguing. I will present as a historian on the one hand, and also as an individual who has lived in the neighborhood of Riga Port for a long period of time. So what did I do here? So when you are a kid, you tend to draw a lot, and sometimes boys draw ships and ports, and I think this is a very interesting picture on this topic. When I was preparing this presentation, I was surprised to find out that not enough scholars have published on this topic. My task today is to provide a broader overview of known theses on how the port developed. On the other hand, I, as a person living in the neighborhood of the port, will point out some features which characterizes the port development in a different context. I will continue from where my colleague stopped. Here you see a picture from the time when the port hadn't been destroyed yet. As you know, in autumn 1944, it was a tragic moment for Riga port. The port was bombarded when the German troops receded. They did not want to leave such a strategically important object behind at the disposal of the enemy. During the first years after war, the water courses are important for reviving the national economy, as we know. And here you see some pictures from the demolished embankment. In 1944, late 1944, and the beginning of 1945, up to the spring, the port renovation works were started in very complicated circumstances. Whenever this was reflected in mass media, the Soviet government kept reminding who had destroyed the port and brought it to ruin. So the first years after war were spent reconstructing the port, using also the workforce of war prisoners. As a result of this reconstruction works, the landscape of the embankment changed. The last remaining features of the old embankment were wiped out. However, it enabled further development. The first steps were made to move the port further away from the city center. And in early 60s, the passenger port, the building of the construction of the passenger port was started. This picture depicts a swimming tradition in Daugava. At the background, you see the port and how the port is moving away from the city center gradually. In early 50s, the first reconstruction works were completed. Andrejosta and Eksportost, these two ports, become the two main cargo handling spots and trading venues. At this moment, we can say that the port has been revived. So what do they write in newspapers? Then the ships approach the Riga port. You see the blooming socialistic Riga. There's a lot of traffic and a lot of cargo is being transported. End of quotation. These two ports continue the ancient traditions, and until 70s they are the two main cargo handling hubs. The two berths which have been equipped for handling various types of cargo. A map which shows how the port territory is segregated and the residents cannot access the river. When we discuss the port development, it does not involve only developing infrastructure. It also involves implementation of new developments, of construction of housing for the port employees. I've chosen these two buildings on Export Street, which in late 50s, early 60s were erected for the employees of the port. So we see how the port has developed not only within its territory, but the infrastructure for its workers is developed as well. The next steps of the port development in the north direction. So the port tends to emerge on the right bank of Daugava. So Riga fishing port, they started constructing it in 1948, and until early 90s, a considerable number of berths were built, including warehouses and housing. Angaisala berth, further to the north. In 1947, it was built for for mooring ships, and the embankment up to the north was developed to develop port infrastructure. Kundziņsala Island, since the 70s of the 20th century, it was planned to develop this territory and build new container terminals and deep water berths. As the press wrote at the time, Kundziņsala has unlimited development possibilities. And it was planned to implement these plans. Historically, there had been a village there, and with the development, the village could be was facing this destruction. Unfortunately, these plans were not implemented due to the war. In the Soviet era, a number of specialized territories were developed around the port. And, however, as I said, my perspective is dual, and it's high time to talk about the second perspective, about how the port entered the territories which had been populated by the residents before, with certain rhythm, daily rhythm and traditions which the port changed. Rīnuži used to be an ancient fisherman village, and until early 50s of the 20th century, the landscape remained traditional. Rīnuži wasn't even considered within the city, territory of the city. Vilis Lācis, the writer who was born in Rīnuži, characterized this place as a village which didn't change for centuries, for generations. Plans from 1936, Rīnuži are not considered part of the city yet, and the plans, the city development blueprints show that these territories were used by the fishermen, where their huts were built, where they moored their boats. This was basically a fishing territory. Another picture how this bank looked at the end of 30s. People could freely access the river, which had been the case for centuries. However, everything changes, and you may not be able to see what it really looked like. However, the village was cut off from the city with the port development, and the port actually changed the ancient rhythm of life, and certain buildings had to be demolished. More residents moved to this part of the city. The only free access to the river Daugava is within a 200-meter strip along the bank. And when I was a kid, it became a favorite special territory for local inhabitants, where we could show off their skills. I could talk for hours about this. These pictures show this free access territory. That initially it was used by fishermen, and later on, in the late 60s, after the storm, the embankment was destroyed, the boat mooring place was destroyed as well, and it was the last bastion, the last spot where the local residents could access the water and spend time. So at this moment, the fishing port, the mooring port, and the tradition of fishing from boats was ended. It was an irreversible change. So the old white church became the last spot where the river could be accessed from the bank. The locals remember these developments both critically as destructive and unnecessary, and some people feel hurt about these events. By the locals, I mean the old Rīnuži inhabitants, but there are also opinions that this reconstruction of the port was an important step towards the city development. When the Republic of Latvia regained its independence, Rīnuži started rethinking its identity with the port as a neighbor. To round up my presentation, I would like to offer my perspective on what should be studied and what could be interesting not only for historians but other researchers. So this period in history needs could offer a lot of exciting topics and discoveries, which could be particularly interesting for a future conference or a scientific publication. So how the port was depicted in the media in the Soviet times, this could be an interesting topic to study. And usually in the Soviet times, the port was depicted in a very romantic way. I would like to emphasize that we need to explore more the spoken word history, the memories of people who used to work in the port and who have lived all their life nearby the port, and how the city has changed and how their lives have been impacted by the development in the port. On this note, I would like to end my presentation today. Thank you for listening. Thank you, Gunti, for an exciting insight into the period which is a mystery to most of us. However, it is part of our heritage, and the planners of today, the engineers, managers, city dwellers, and active citizens are interested in this period. Thank you for the insight you provided in this historical heritage, and which we cannot ignore.